You moved into television, obviously, after radio, and you covered some huge events. Obviously, the big ones to sort of start with would be, the title wins that you covered with Man City, Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Leeds United. What were some of the best memories that you had covering those sort of title wins? Because it must be a really good feel around the area, and there must be some sort of nostalgia that you can take us back to some of those events.
Yeah, I mean, they all kind of blur into the next one, really, because there are so many of them. But I suppose, in terms of drama, I was there the day Manchester City beat QPR to win the title for the first time in the Premier League era, anyway, under Mancini. And that was one of the most extraordinary days I think I've ever seen. Well documented. Everyone, I think, who follows football knows the story of how Aguero scored very, very late on to win the title. But yeah, I mean, I think back, I saw them win it again. I saw Company score that goal against Leicester that just about ensured that they would win it the next Saturday. I saw Sir Alex Ferguson bow out on his last day, holding the trophy in 2013. Yeah, I mean, they all kind of blur into one, but the big ones stand out. The cities, the unbelievable Manchester United sides of the past under Ferguson. I remember John Terry winning it on his last day as Chelsea captain. Privileged to be there. I never lost sight of the fact it was a privilege. Always great fun. I mean, it's a little bit like going to the pub. Everyone's your friend and everyone's in a good mood, and that's what going to a title-winning day is. As long as it goes to plan, everyone's in a good mood. Everyone's happy. The atmosphere is fantastic. It's usually May, so the sun's shining. So they're all kind of unforgettable days, even though they blur a little bit as I look back.
And out of those title-winning teams, who would you say had the best team out of those title winners that you've covered?
Well, that's hard to say. I do think Manchester City have set new standards on occasions during their rise to the top. Football I've never seen before. I've not seen a huge amount of European football, so I'm not perhaps best placed to judge. I've seen World Cup football, and people say European sort of Champions League football is a higher standard than the World Cup anyway. So, but some of the stuff Man City were playing, a season or two ago was just breathtaking. Just a privilege to be there sometimes. It's impossible to answer that question. Is kind of what I'm coming around to. Other days I've seen Thierry Henry in his pomp with Bergkamp and just watched open-mouthed and thought, "Good grief, I'm getting paid to do this." And it was just as I say, it was a privilege. It was a privilege to witness it, and I just think I was just very lucky.
And you've reported for some huge sort of global competitions as well. You've done 3 World Cups, 3 Euros, 6 African Cup of Nations. I sort of remember you mostly from the 2010 South Africa Football World Cup, and I think there was a lot of coverage from yourself there. What do you think was your favourite competition that you covered, and why?
I've got a bit of a soft spot for the African nations because it's not as big, frankly, as the European Championships or the World Cup. It's a little bit more homely, shall we say. And my old man is African, so I have a bit of a feeling for it anyway. And you get to travel to some places that in the normal run of things you wouldn't go to. I mean, I'm not sure I'm likely to go on holiday to Mali or to Botswana or Angola or somewhere like that. But yeah, I did. My job has taken me there. And it's just so off the beaten track and just so unusual, and the stuff you see. And I remember being in Mali when George Weah was playing for what's his team? Yeah, his team. Who did he play for? George Weah, his national team. I've forgotten off the top of my head. But he's played for. Sorry. It'll come back to me. But he was playing in the national stadium in Bamako in Mali, and they were trailing 1-0. And I'm close to the perimeter edge. The cameraman, I wasn't allowed sort of pitch side. The cameraman was doing his stuff pitch side, and I was sort of standing back near the running track. Liberia, he played for. So Liberia playing Mali, national stadium in Bamako, full to the rafters. Mali are winning. I'm stood at the edge, and George Weah, I think it was George Weah or someone else equalised late in the game. Or I may have that the other way around. It may be that George Weah had put them ahead and Mali equalised. I forget the details. But anyway, I'm in front of the fans of the team that had scored the goal, this late equaliser. And the place just erupted when the goal went in. And I remember being hit on the head by an old transistor radio from the 1960s. I recognise it because it's the kind of thing my mum had when I was a kid. And this thing was broken anyway. It was just a bit of a radio. And where did they get that? Why did they take it to a football match? What was going on? and I was hurt. It hurt my head. But at the same time, I was laughing my head off at the bizarre notion that I should be hit on the head by half a transistor radio at a football match. So that's just a random thought that comes into my head. But the World Cup and the European Championships, far more sanitised, if you like, far more ordered. Everything happens, it's timed. It's 3:02, the players enter the tunnel. It's 3:05, the players enter the pitch. Everything is ordered, regimented. It's done to a plan. The African nations was a bit more off the cuff, and all the more fun for it.
And obviously, you've done some absolutely massive interviews. You've spoken to Zidane, Henry, Capello, to name a few. Has there ever been an interview that you've been ridiculous? This can transcend across, sport, just in general, news as well. Has there ever been an interview you've been very, very nervous for?
Yeah, I think you're always on your toes when you interview, particularly the sort of intimidating characters like Sir Alex Ferguson. You don't know how he's going to react. So yeah, the bigger the name, I guess the more the sort of butterflies are there a little bit. But as the years go on, you kind of learn to sort of control that, really, and just focus on what you've got to do, which is essentially get some usable answers out of them that can be used on the telly, which is, it's not rocket science. You want to know what he thinks about the game, any controversies that are in the game, the context of where this leaves his team, good and bad performance. They're human the same as you are. I'm sure none of them are intimidated by me in the way that I might be intimidated by them. But it's a conversation between two people at the end of the day. And okay, they're in a particular frame of mind. Even if they've won, they might actually fire off at you and turn the tables on you. So you've got to be on your toes, really. You've got to use your experience and your training and your and whatever knowledge you've picked up to cope and deal the best you can.
Were there any sort of standout difficult interviews that you've sort of done during your career?
It's probably the Pep Guardiola one a few years ago when he was in a really foul mood because he was been unhappy about some refereeing decisions in a game, and he just didn't want to answer the questions. And I had to sort of persist at sort of asking the questions and covering the issues that arose out of the game, if you like. And it was just very difficult. Became a bit of a sort of news story for a day or two. Picked up by a few of the newspapers and even mentioned on Radio 4. I remember hearing it on the Today programme, which seems a bit bizarre. I think punters like to see a bit of anarchy in an interview. I think it's entertaining. It's all part of the cut and thrust of the game. Not everybody liked it. Some people said I was sort of fancied myself a bit for standing up to him. Other people said, he was at fault. So, you put it out there and people draw their own conclusions, really.